When literature and ideology get jammed, you get poetry slammed. Hello, something guys and gals. This is Something Guy 912 on another edition of Poetry Slammed. Before I go into the poem in question, I wanted to make a small announcement about the future of Poetry Slammed. I wanted to do some updates to the initial intro sequence as well as the thumbnail in question from episode 5 onwards, as a sort of marked improvement for where I started from. I also wanted to try making a more concise table of ratings when it comes to rating the poem on its key merits, as I can't quite keep consistent on the format. So without further ado, the poem in question. So, cultural appropriation, one of many trap cards from a social justice warrior in their plight to make white people feel guilty by association of other white people, presumably, stealing other cultures. And Franny Choy here, with her Asian privilege and problem glasses in tow, will personify whiteness, as if whiteness is a character trait of white people, not simply a descriptor, as the imaginary devil that race realists must fight with the most extreme of prejudice. If you think prejudice isn't the right term here, may I remind you that these are the same people who cry foul about white people culturally appropriating to an extreme, minute level, but go silent and even encourage other races to culturally appropriate others. You never hear any of them complain about radical Islam attempting to distort Western values with Sharia law. You never hear any of them complain about Christian Africans using the English language despite, by their very definition of it being cultural appropriation. And you surprisingly never hear any of them flogging themselves at the mass for using lyrical poetic phrases, microphones, and glasses that were all made by Western European or American inventors. It's only wrong if white people culturally appropriate other cultures and not the other way around for some retarded reason, although we all know that it's entirely by ideological reasons. But I'm sure that Miss Bok Choy over here will convince me somehow. As with my previous 3 entries, I will go over the poem piece by piece in response format, basically as I do with everything else, then rate the poem based on 4 key elements: message/context, structure/verses, transparency, and rhythm, and for the lulz, a shrillometer, depending on how hard they are trying to get me to rip my own ears off, so as not to hear another shrill harpy wax stale about white privilege. So without further bloviating, take it away, Franny.
Whiteness walks into a bar and orders a scotch on the rocks.
Seems like an awfully hard drink for whiteness to drink. I figured it'd be for the tequila or daiquiri kind of taste.
Bartender's like, anything else? Whiteness is like, oh, can I also get all your resources, political autonomy, and sense of self-worth? Bartender's like, do you want to start a tab?
This sounds like a pretty bad feminist joke, but at the same time, at least for once in this series, there is a character, an analogy, and an overarching setting in place. That being said, the idea that only whiteness demands of resources and political autonomy is absolute dog shit. What about the Mongol invasion that basically changed the culture of Southern Asia and Eastern Europe for centuries to come? What about the Dark Ages, where tribes of different stripes came and destroyed the remnants of ancient Rome? Aren't they taking away the political autonomy and sense of self-worth from those indigenous places? Oh, but it's only whiteness who does it on a massive constant scale, ignoring the fact that if that was true, there could be a reason for it, other than simply by the color of the skin, such as the placement of animals in domesticated areas, the strengthening of immunity to common diseases like tuberculosis or smallpox, the tribes who didn't build said immunity. You could basically watch Guns, Germs, and Steel and find just how Western European countries were able to dominate over minority groups. But it wasn't because they were fucking white.
2, Whiteness walks into a bar and orders an IPA. He gets his drink and then he just starts wrecking shit. He's smashing all the liquor bottles, he pours the wine out onto the floor, he unhooks all of the kegs except for the IPA that he has just ordered.
What a dick. Whiteness or not, that's a pretty dick thing to do. Not sure why no one called the authorities to get this drunken bastard out, but I'm sure it might have something to do with white privilege or something.
So eventually everyone starts to order that too, since everything else is ruined. Whiteness sits back on his stool, takes a sip of his drink, and says, why is everyone always copying me?
Like, oh my god, Franny, he totally just ruined the bar. Let's go somewhere else. Oh my god, bitch. But in regards to the analogy, I don't really hear white people, or whiteness for that matter, making complaints about people doing the same thing they are. Or was that supposed to show the hypocrisy of the whiteness in question? It's funny that when other cultures copy white people are just nonchalant about it and just curious why people are imitating them. Whereas if the opposite were to occur, it's a slight on that entire culture and erasing the experiences of those who lived in that culture somehow. Like that one fuckhead who said an artist attempting the style of a Native American artist was committing cultural genocide.
3. Whiteness walks into a bar with a golden retriever. The golden retriever promptly takes a shit on the floor. The bartender's like, "What the fuck, Whiteness?"
Yeah, Whiteness. Why the fuck do you have a golden retriever and not a chocolate lab, you fucking racist?
Whiteness is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. Tone?"
Oh yeah, like as if people who think cultural appropriation is a serious crime and should be met with autistic screeching is not tone policing in any way. Not to say that people do take things way out of hand, white or otherwise, but to insist that an entire race of people, or a descriptor of a race for that matter, are going to play the tone policing game back at you is so politically ironic that it's sad that Franny's unaware of it. Although I will say this is one of the more pleasant poem slams I've listened so far.
Meanwhile, the dog has started to run as it shits, spraying wet feces everywhere, and Whiteness is like, if you want me to respect you and your cause, you could try being a little less confrontational.
Seems like a weird addendum to apply to a dog running around while shitting, something that is literally impossible to do, dog or human, but I get the analogy of the phrase, although don't agree with it. You see, a lot of people have a problem with your cause is that you first inject a negative quality about someone without evidence and then proceed to tell everyone around the block that that person has that negative quality, starting with feminists who call gamer-gamers a bunch of basement-dwelling misogynists who play games to oppress women. They don't have any reason not to be confrontational to these feminists, yet they must suppress their strident reaction to an exaggerated claim, or else the label they falsely apply becomes reinforced, even though the label has still yet to be under scrutiny. Nathan D'Amigo is a neo-Nazi, but I literally do not care that he punched an Antifa member and that Antifa claim to fight against fascism because Antifa has broadly painted the brush of Nazi on their dissenters' faces without any evidence, without any proof, in an attempt to paint the opposition as negative and virtue signal to the masses to bolden their side. So I weep no tears for that bitch who threw bottles and M80s at crowds for getting a punch to the face. Frankly, I wish this political violence could stop, as it serves no aim but to embolden outrage culture. But at the same time, if it is to occur, whoever started it is in the wrong, even if I happen to agree with them on a fundamental scale. Also, as a small side, don't most bars have a "dogs not allowed" sign at the door?
4. Whiteness walks into a bar and people start to recognize him as the guy who came in last week and stole everyone's wallets.
Wait, when did this happen? I'm assuming the frame of time was inconsequential, sort of an anthology into the character of Whiteness, but now time is taken into account. Also, how has this guy not been 86'd off the premises, or even in jail for that matter? Even with his mighty magical power of white privilege, you think even that would not save him from all manner of crime.
Bartender's like, "What the fuck, Whiteness?" Whiteness is like, "Hey, we can't change the past, but you know what? This round's on me."
I see the analogy of this, and once again is a painful exaggeration of the offense against people saying that white people are accountable for actions in the past. The defense is usually that not only was the action not done by those white people, but it happened so long ago, take it 200, 300 years ago, that they literally could not do anything about it, yet these minority groups insist that they pay them reparations or cut themselves to the almighty progressive party. In the instance of Whiteness here, yes, he's an asshole for insisting that people just forget what he did in a week that he did himself, but that is not indicative of what white people say when they insist that they are not accountable for actions that their ancestors did. I can see through your lies, Franny.
Later, Whiteness writes off the donation on his taxes. Duh.
Well, that's tax fraud and he'll be arrested for a felony on his tax return. So yeah, smart move, Whiteness. But I highly fucking doubt that all white people are doing this. But the comments tell me that I just don't get it. That I'm just a triggered white person who doesn't get how oppressive I am to other people. Imagine the reaction this video would be if it was titled "Blackness Walks into a Bar" and the following line goes, Blackness walks to a bar and asks for a watermelon on the rocks. Hold the fried chicken. I mean, why are you so offended? I'm just making a broad generalization of all black people like as if it's true and not even joking about it in the slightest.
5. Whiteness walks into a bar and tips over a glass with his elbow. It shatters into a million pieces. Whiteness walks up to the bartender and says, "Excuse me, it appears that there is glass on the floor."
Nice observation, Sherlock, is probably the rebuttal to that.
Slowly, everyone in the bar rises to their feet and begins to clap, moved by Whiteness's bravery and honesty.
It doesn't take a person to be honest to point something that everyone, including the bartender, could see. I see that the people in the bar are just as stupid as Whiteness himself.
Women throw handkerchiefs at Whiteness's feet. Everyone shakes Whiteness's hand. Whiteness gets offered a TED Talk.
TED Talk. Ideas worth silencing.
Meanwhile, no one notices the janitor sweeping up the glass. No one ever notices the ones doing the real work.
Yeah, like as if your undulation over white people being so proud and chauvinistic is real work, or you constantly whinging on about women being oppressed in the Middle East and then asserting that same oppression is happening here is real work. Yeah, you're right that no one notices people doing the real work, but that's not exclusive to any person or any race or any fucking minority demographic. That's why virtue signals exist, darling, so you can get all the moral blowjobs resting at your heels without any of the real credit for it.
6. Here's the real punchline. Whiteness was always in the bar. Whiteness built the bar. Whiteness owns the bar. Any damage he does to the bar, he's just doing to himself.
So here's the part where the entire structure of this poem and the analogy of the poem just jumps the shark. If Whiteness built the bar, that means in essence he did real work, right? If he owns the bar, that means all the cakes and beers that he broke in the previous phrases were his to begin with, and not him culturally appropriating anybody or anything, right? If he's damaging the welfare of his own bar for shits and giggles, supposedly, then the previous statements are completely in vain because while everyone else is unaffected by it, he's hurting himself in the long run. So I ask, what is the point of this poem now? You built Whiteness to be this big evil asshole, and now he's just a simpering dolt who burns his own $100 bills out of glee.
And Whiteness cannot hurt Whiteness.
Clearly he is, if health code violations and overall cleanliness and reception of the bar going into the shitter. He might not be hurting himself in the emotional way, so that's the only thing you fuckers care about, but financially, he is.
7. Whiteness walks in. Whiteness walks in on 80 feet.
So he's a caterpillar now, or is it an amalgamation of 40 people? Is this a human centipede by chance?
Whiteness wears a body in small doses. Whiteness uses its 80 mouths to ask me to tell it about itself, so I say...
Before I let her say it, wouldn't it be 40 mouths since you said 80 feet? Or did you mean 80 pairs of feet? Also, how does someone wear something in small doses? Does he take an injection that makes him human every now and then again?
Whiteness, you are a poor substitute for blood.
Compared to blood runs thicker than water? This is starting to get into those traditional poetic obscurities in a real bad way.
Whiteness, you are a bad joke. Everyone's too uncomfortable to laugh at.
Maybe because Whiteness isn't a joke, and every characterization of Whiteness is used as some kind of blanket statement of white people rather than a descriptor of someone's skin color. Just a thought.
Whiteness, I'm laughing in the back of the classroom. I'm throwing your desks out the window. I'm setting fire to the bar. I'm laughing until your legs are small.
This has just gone all over the place. I was actually liking that, for once, a poem staying on narrative track, and now it's just gone into obscurity hell. We go from Whiteness being an analogy to this weird insectoid creature that occasionally loses its guise now and then, who presumably owns a school on top of owning a bar, and getting smaller by the second. Maybe Franny is implying that Whiteness is a thing of the past, like as if Whiteness was ever something we should be afraid of to begin with, but Franny is just so quick to hit the final flourish of this poem that she has to cut corners and to make a moral of this to this fragmented story.
I'm laughing until your blood is thin.
Wait, wasn't Whiteness a bad substitute for blood? Is it diabetic too? How ableist of you to point out Whiteness's poor sugar count, you oppressive shitlord.
I'm laughing until your throat is parched. I'm laughing until you are small.
First the legs, and then up to the center with this shrinking technology. Honey, I've shrunk the Whiteness.
And afraid and wailing on me with your tiny fists, and it's funny, you know. It's so funny.
Yeah, you go, girl! You first make the imaginary enemy you are fighting look so fearsome and tough to beat, and then you find a way to defeat it that is so catastrophically easy as to make the evil force you are fighting almost insignificant to the plight of the people, and then you get to stand on your podium, proud of your defeat of the imaginary enemy that you made in your own mind until everyone is sucking on your toes. Remember the part when you said how all the people were clapping about the bravery and honesty of Whiteness, pointing out the broken glass shards? Well, you are now Whiteness, pointing out the invisible white privilege out in the sky and expecting an applause from the crowd that now literally stands before you, and you don't even see the irony in making that analogy above all the others. So that was Whiteness Walks into a Bar, a subtly callous middle finger to white people in general, even if the commenters think that somehow whiteness isn't distinct from white people. So now to the ratings. For message/context, I give it a 3. While you may think this is unreasonably high considering the amount of cultural appropriation buzzwords and colonialism talks she gives, I will say that she at least stays consistent for about 90% of the poem before dabbling into semantics about whiteness being some weird 80-mouthed, 80-footed abomination that squirms at the sight of a minority but is also ruthless the same. For structure/verses, I give it a 7. This is perhaps the strongest part of the poem, as Franny manages to stay on the theme of whiteness being in a bar, causing shit, and inferring that to one or multiple aspects of this white privilege theme, even as I disagree with it wholeheartedly. It's also the first in the series where we actually get a character in the setting, rather than jumping between 14 characters and 14 locations like with Elisa Chavez's poem. For transparency, I give it a 1. It seems that Franny doesn't seem to realize that this cultural appropriation, white privilege, colonialism game she's pulling is going to backfire on her, as people are going to use the same arguments against her in regards to her using an Apple tablet, more than likely made by a sweatshop working in China, shitlord, as well as a microphone stand and glasses made by white people when she's Asian. Even if she stays consistent with the theme of the poem, the argument inside of it is still shit and equally selective in what offends someone. And for rhythm, I give it a 5. While yes, the structure complements part of the movement of the poem, some of the analogies do fall apart in the latter parts of the poem, as the bullet points for whiteness get thrown out for the vague poem soup in the last parts. That brings the average for this poem to a solid 4, just a snail's pace away from Imani Cezanne's The Feminist Commandments, if only the topic of the poem was an absolute dogshit and Freddie had any amount of self-awareness over the irony of using white people's tools to complain about white people stealing other people's tools. I give her a 2 on the Shrillometer, like with Imani, which puts her on the same level as this BuzzFeed bot going.
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I f***ing hate video games, because this is what it does. It appeals to like the male fantasy.
Tune in next time for my next episode of Poetry Slammed in an improved format.